Hello. First of all, I'd like to thank Russell and the ACCU committee for inviting me to speak here. It's a real honour and terribly scary. In fact, when Russell first wrote to me about 5 months ago to ask me to present this keynote, my initial reaction was absolutely terrified. And then I thought about it for a while, actually while I was out running with Beth, and I thought, well, I should be used to being outside my comfort zone by now. I was outside my comfort zone when I stood up to my first boss for the first time and told him he was wrong, and it was never going to work. I was outside my comfort zone when I became a parent, and that was hard. I was outside my comfort zone when I came out, and that was harder. I was outside my comfort zone when I started a software company, and that's been fun. So right now, I'll be honest, I am so far outside my comfort zone that I might as well be in another building, one which has preferably got a lot fewer people in it, and definitely not a load of people all looking at me expecting me to say something funny or interesting. But comfort zones, we've all got them, and they're going to be different for every one of us. But they're a key driver of how we think, feel, and act. And I think that because of that, we owe it to ourselves to take a closer look and to look at what ours are and why they are, what they make us do, and to challenge that and to possibly see if we can grow beyond it. So, this is what I'm going to talk about today. Do I need to get away from that microphone? Is it echoing? Or is it the same over here? Some cute and not so cute furry animals. Instinct, reflexes, and training. Moving the user interface cheese. Rational and instinctive behavior. Where are the lines between them? Where's the boundary drawn? The pain of code critique. We all feel that one. Brains. Anybody into Plants vs. Zombies? Change and the neuroscience of anger. Saying welcome. And a few hopeful signs. Just a few things I've noticed, including this week. So, if you've ever seen Melissa Perry speak, her slides are literally splattered, not in a bad way, with kittens. But I'm more of a dog person. I grew up with them, and they've always been sort of something that I felt safe around. So when I see a dog, I go out running or I go out walking, I see a dog, my mind unconsciously identifies it as likely to be friend or foe based on its body language, its breed, and the same thing for the owner. I'm pretty sure that that's going on, okay? And it probably does the same to me. So, I see a collie or a Labrador or something, and I'm like, and it's, dog person, But with one exception, which was a Rottweiler late at night while staggering back from the pub with a kebab when I was in my 20s in Maidenhead. I've never really had a bad experience with a dog. So I don't know how much of that is learned behavior and how much of it is instinctive. If I had bad experiences with dogs, especially as a small child, I might think differently. I might react differently, and the dogs pick up on that. We inherit the starting point for how we behave, how we react from our parents, through our genetics, through our genes. But our personal experience has got the strongest part to play in how we react to the world around us. Okay. Is anybody arachnophobic? Sorry. This is a Brazilian wandering spider. It's probably the most venomous, nastiest, most aggressive spider in the world. You don't find them in this country unless they come here in a pack of bananas, because this is the banana spider. It's really nasty, really dangerous, and its venom is fatal. But very, very few people die from these because we've got really good antivenoms. So we don't need to be afraid of them, just wary. I wouldn't put my finger near that, and I certainly wouldn't stick it on my arm like that. Whoever that was, really brave, or just knew a good doctor. But lots of people are afraid of spiders, even though we don't have anything that nasty in this country. How much of that is intrinsic and how much of it is down to social conditioning, I don't know, but I think it's interesting. Then you see a spider like this that provokes a very similar reaction. This is a coastal peacock jumping spider, and like all the most interesting animals, it's Australian. It appeals to my sense of humor. It moves in a way which is hilarious. It dances. In fact, its dance is so good that it is the only spider whose mating dance has been set to the music of the village people. And if we have time at the end, I have the video. You know, you've got a choice of two. So I like these ones. They're funny, but same basic pattern, and the brain is still going to recognize that as an alien form. So people are still scared of them, even though they're tiny, about yay big, a few millimeters across, and completely harmless. We really don't know whether, how an individual is going to react. Is that rational behavior? Is it instinctive? Is it social conditioning? Don't know. So, we've had puppies, we've had spiders. What happens when you combine the two? Meet the spider dog. This is from This comes from a prank outfit in South Africa called S.A. Wadega. And they did this. It's a really cute, friendly dog. Put a spider costume on it, let it out late at night, and they filmed it. And this is a predictable reaction. This is only a short clip. And what you can't see in this clip is this guy here has got to the end, he's walking along, and he's got there, and he's stopped because he's seen something that his brain has gone, whoa. What he's seen is fake dismembered body parts, dripping in fake blood, hanging up in a fake spider's web. So his brain's gone, whoa, and then he's looked and he's gone, fake. So he's got his phone out and he's taking pictures. So he knows this is a prank. And then this thing runs up behind him. What does he do? His brain goes, danger, and off he is. This is what happens when we are exposed to changes in our environment. So, cute or scary really isn't just a matter of how we consciously perceive things. It's how our brains are able to flag up changes in our environment, things we've not encountered before, as being either safe or potentially dangerous. And that has really big implications for every part of our lives. So I think we owe ourselves to think about it a little. So let's try something else. It's no accident that our logo has a halberd on it. That's what this is. And this is the spiky bit that goes on the end of one of these things. This is a reenactment of the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. This one was actually done in 2000. That picture was taken in 2009. But I used to be in the middle of that lot a few years ago. And when I first joined the group concerned, they had a really interesting training method, really, really simple. What they did was they gave you a sword, and they sent you out into the corner with an experienced fighter who taught you the basics of how to defend yourself and how to return the attack safely. And the key word here is safely. These, you see the occasional one here, these weapons are carbon steel. They are incredibly dangerous. They're blunted, but they're capable of causing very serious injury. So what they do is they take you into the corner and they teach you a basic set of moves called the fives. There are 5 attacks and 5 parries. And once you've seen these, Every time you watch a Hollywood movie which has got a sword fight in, you'll go, oh, they're not trying. Headshot, headshot, Can we go home yet? So these moves are initially something you have to really practice on. You have to practice to put a parry into a headshot, to lock your wrist, to stop the blade getting knocked back into your forehead. You know, you practice these moves, but they really quickly they become automatic, and they have to, because the brain's not very good at parallel programming. Or parallel processing. It will only see. You can only consciously really think about one thing at a time, and then you stop and you think about something else. Now, anybody who's worked on single core machines knows it's slow. You can't work like that if you're facing multiple stimuli, multiple threats. So you have to be able to do that while thinking about what's for lunch. So as a result of that, they're able to train you to a really high standard, so that none of this is choreographed. It's all live. You just have a rough idea of what the script is. And we use the same sort of process in all of our learned behavior. It doesn't matter. You drive a car. How many people you drive into work? You forget how you got there. You just kind of, oh look, yeah. I don't remember locking the door, let alone driving to work half the time. It's the same thing. The brain is really good at learning. It's really good at laying down new pathways and taking advantage of them. So that's interesting. There's something there. Another thing that's worth noting here is that when we learn something, we're creating these pathways in our brain. If you like, we're slightly rewiring it. But it's just unique to us. We can't pass this on. It's not like evolution. So we're going to inherit the same basic template from our parents as 100 generations previous did from their parents, with a few minor genetic mutations. But this stuff, we don't have genetic memory. We can't pass it on. My kids can't sword fight. At least I don't think that they can. I could be wrong. Okay, sorry. I know it's not fashionable. Some tech stuff. Okay, so I work in Visual Studio, and I've been beta testing the thing for over a decade. And I've got used to its party quirks, and there are some versions I like more than others, and some I really, really don't like. But one of the consequences of the way Microsoft used to work, I say used to work because of this stuff here, is I've always described them as having an unofficial two-step release policy, by which I mean that they make these big plans, and then they'll put a release out where they can't quite get everything in and complete all the testing, and things will break. And then they come along a little while later, and they'll fix it. Whoops, sorry, I'm not supposed to do that. I'll use the pointer next time. So when Visual Studio 2010 came along, it was generally quite well received, but it was really slow and there was a load of broken stuff. So when 2012 was due out, we were expecting a lot really from them. We were expecting it not to change too much. We were expecting a big focus on performance, on reducing bloat, and there was a lot of anticipation. And then one day in February 2012, we woke up to a blog post. I like surprise blog posts, but sometimes they're not the sort of surprise you want. Called Introducing the New Developer Experience. And this was written by one of the Microsoft UX team, and it was the first thing we'd heard about the beta for this new version. And it went a bit crazy. What basically they were complaining about is a change in the user interface. The cheese hadn't so much moved, it's been kind of taken away and replaced with a newer, tackier kind of cheese, one we didn't really like. It's gone from a comfortable, mature cheddar to a really plasticky, processed cheese. You know, the ones with the little slices or something. It was just a bit blah. Anyway, so this is Visual Studio 2010. It's quite a bright environment, a bit of a change from its predecessor, but it was a change that was in line with what people were expecting. So it went down well, except it took forever to start, especially on a spinning disk. Even on an SSD, it's slow. So if you put a spinner in a laptop and run this, you might as well just go and get a coffee. That's what they were going to change it to. Grey, really grey. The idea was to focus in your attention in the central area where your code is, and to prevent these areas, or these panels around the outside, from distracting you. This was around the time that Windows 8 was coming out. Sinofsky was in charge, and there was a major push towards the Metro styling. And you see hints of this, like all caps is creeping in various places. Now, after the big howl of derision about the beta, because it did actually come out like this, they kind of backed down a little bit, and they put a few colors into the icons, and they backed down about this. But then in a fit of pique, these went all caps. The one good thing they did, and I'll give them credit for this, is that up on the Tools menu there was an option for changing the theme. So there was a dark theme, and there was this theme, which is called light, but I just called, walls of grey. And eventually somebody wrote within Microsoft, got the hint, and they wrote a theme editor, shipped a whole bunch of new themes, including one that looks like that. Except it's all caps at the top, and all the icons are pretty much monochrome. So they kind of said, OK, and they grudgingly moved the cheese back a little bit. In 2013, they moved it back a little bit further, but they're not going to go all the way back. It's pretty clear that they've said this is the line that we will not cross. That's the line I'm not going to cross because I'll fall over. OK. So was this rational? That's interesting. The tone of the comments that were on that thread indicate it wasn't. People were unhappy. There was a lot of anger, and even when there were arguments presented which were reasoned and thought through, they were presented in a very angry context. There was real emotion there. You could read it, and it was natural, because fear of change is natural, and any change in our environment is a potential threat. Fear is an evolutionary response to that threat, which can even become a phobia. We like to feel in control of our environment because that makes us feel safe. It's automatic. When the cheese moves, we're not in control. It makes us feel uncomfortable, and sometimes we react. But why? Brains. When we talk about the brain, for the most part, we're thinking of the bit at the front, the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part, the thing that defines us. But that's really only part of the picture. In the 1950s, the physician and neuroscientist Paul Dean McLean proposed a metaphorical model of the brain. It's not a physical model. It doesn't say this bit's connected to this bit and these signals go here. It's just a way of thinking about how the brain functions, to give us an easy way of analyzing it. And he grouped the structures into broadly three parts. The primal brain, basically the brainstem. So that deals with all the really low-level stuff, your vital functions, fight, freeze, or flight, sex, food, all the rest. The emotional brain, the bit in the middle, the bit that's associated with memory and all of your emotions. And the conscious mind, which is us. There's some interesting side effects. When you think about the brain this way, you start noticing things. You start noticing that this guy's not in control a lot of the time. especially when you're under stress. When you're under stress, you're driving from here. If your life's threatened, you're probably driving from here. And another thing that's interesting is this, thinking back to Marianne's keynote yesterday, System 1 thinking, System 2 thinking. It's exactly the same thing, just looked at from a slightly different perspective. Our senses and reflexes are wired directly into all parts of the brain. The lowest unconscious parts of the brain can tell if you're being threatened. You can see a sword coming towards you from your peripheral vision. If you are in imminent danger, it's these parts of the brain that will react, not this one. This guy is too slow, and it might be thinking about what's for lunch or something. So when we recognize a pattern or react to something, what's happening is that our unconscious mind is telling us something. It's not going to tell us what. It's just going to make us feel something or do something. At this point, I'd be remiss if I didn't point you at these two talks. Natalie Nahai did a talk at Business of Software 2014 called The Secret Psychology Behind Online Persuasion, which is all about marketing in the web, but it is directly relevant to this material, and it is really, really interesting. Very, very funny as well. And Jenny Jepson, High Performance Teams, Neuroscience and Agile. Again, it's all about change, from Agile on the beach last year. So let's have a quick look at the brain. This bit here is the brainstem and the areas associated with it. So you can think of this as the primal brain. All your lowest functions are being regulated there. Around the outside is the neocortex. So your thinking part is around here. And in the middle, this is where all the memories and the emotions go. That's where the interesting stuff that makes us the irrational creatures that we are is happening. The two that interest me, particularly, are the amygdala. There's two of them, one on either side, and the hypothalamus. This one's associated with emotional memory, and this one, among other things, links the endocrine system to the brain. So we don't think in this part of the brain, in the limbic system. It communicates with our conscious mind through our emotions. So when we feel something, it's the unconscious mind trying to tell us something. The question is, what? And what do we do about it? Jenny Jepson wrote something interesting on this. She said, when you get a gut feeling, this is the brain recognizing patterns, giving you that feeling, but it doesn't tell you why it's making you feel that way. Change for the brain is novel. The first time you see something, it may be scary, so it warns you to back off. That means that humans will resist change and have a lack of understanding of why they would want to change. We've always done it this way. Why do you want to muck things up? They want to know what's in it for me, so they need to know the payoff. Interesting, huh? But so parts of the limbic system are hardwired to produce specific responses to particular stimuli. We feel many of these responses in the form of emotions. Others are wired to our endocrine systems and even our reflexes. Again, it depends upon the strength of the stimuli and how you're going to react or how you're likely to react. The conscious mind is usually involved, can be involved, but it depends upon the stress level. But these circuits, for want of a better word, haven't changed in millennia. Our environment has, massively. If you think back 100,000 years ago, where were we? Our species is only 30,000 or so years old. We're talking our ancestors there. This is a really ancient part of our wiring. We didn't domesticate dogs until somewhere between, I think the most recent estimate we've had is 17,000 years ago. Makes you think. So our conscious mind may have adapted to our changing environment. We get all these social cues and all the learning we get from our peers and from our parents, but our wiring is ancient. And the end result is that we tend to get emotional, angry, and all the rest of it about things that we weren't designed to deal with. Things that didn't exist 100,000 years ago. Okay, so case in point, anger. Beetroot, yeah. I get angry about beetroot. Ask Beth. Also peanut butter. Anger's an interesting one because it underpins so much of our history. It's a destructive emotion, but it's also a survival reflex. And it's a trigger for aggression, but one need not follow the other. The conscious mind has a choice. But the stronger the emotion is, the harder it is not to react. So there's a neuroscientist called R. Douglas Fields, and he identified an area in the brain called the hypothalamic attack area. And what he discovered was that if you stimulate this area with electrodes, it can provoke a rage response, absolute, phenomenally strong anger, strong enough to kill, depending on the stimuli. So this is interesting. What's going on here? He went a bit further and he looked at what the triggers were for that response in live mammals. And this is what he found. 9 triggers: life or limb, threat to, being insulted, threats to our family, changes in our environment, possible mate, threats to the established order, shortage of resources, challenge to our tribe, and being stopped or restrained. If you read the article that's linked there, you'll hear him recount a story where he was on holiday in, I think it was Barcelona, with his daughter, and he just felt something swipe his leg. And he patted his leg where the zip pocket containing his wallet was, and he discovered it was gone. And before he knew it, he grabbed the guy who just picked his pocket, knocked him to the ground and applied an illegal chokehold to him, and was basically holding him there. Unfortunately, this guy was part of a gang, and he spent the next 2 hours racing through the streets of Barcelona with his daughter, trying to get away from these people because they wanted revenge. Their tribe had been insulted. So this shows the power of all those automatic responses in our brains, what we can actually do. Okay, but we don't have to react. But when we push people out of their comfort zones, we can usually expect a reaction. We're threatening them. And then we have, well, just because we feel something, that doesn't mean we have to react. We have a choice. But, as I said, the stronger the emotion, or the higher the stress level, the harder it becomes not to do so instinctively. I wonder, small changes, high engagement, are less likely to provoke a backlash than if you try to impose a large change from above. So if you want to change something, you've got to get buy-in. It's interesting to see how that comes back to, I mean, we've heard this from other sources, but it's interesting to see how this comes back to the way that we react on such a primal level. Okay. I think it's likely that another I think it's likely the critique is another thing that's going to push people outside their comfort zone. Again, we're going to hit the insult trigger. If the critique's coming from outside their tribe, you're instinctively compounding the hurt. So, code review by peers, that's not nice, is it? Until you get used to it. But a dumb automated tool telling you your code is crap, don't like that. So a newly introduced process also violates the existing order, and it's representing a change in the environment. Looked at it that way, it's not surprising that people tend to get angry, they tend to resist. They need to get used to the change. Change is a threat. We don't like threats. So, this is where it gets interesting, and I think this is probably one of the more important things to think about, especially as a result of the discussions we've had this week. So we like to think of our tech communities as meritocratic places, and to be fair, some are, and or try very hard to be. But all too often we're seeing bullying, misogyny, anger, and aggression. And it can be much, much worse. Especially if you're perceived as being outside of the tribe. We can do better. We really can do better than this. But why is it happening? It's instinctive behavior. It's not rational. People are lashing out because they're feeling threatened. Now, Rory Miller of the Conflict Research Group said the following, which I think kind of says a lot about the whole subject. He said, "We spend most of our time in our social and emotional brains. We think we are being logical and thoughtful. In reality, we're trying to stay in the good graces of an imaginary tribe and make sure that things never change. The violence at this level rarely gets physical, and when it does, it is, with only two exceptions, designed not to physically injure." Physically is my addition. Social violence is all about sending messages. You are not one of us. You broke the rules. This is my territory. Treat me better. I am superior to you. Aren't I cool? Sounds horribly familiar, doesn't it? I think this is kind of key. I don't know, by the way, I don't know what the two exceptions are because he didn't actually address those in there. I haven't read into the subject enough to be able to identify them, but what can we say? What can we do apart from eating burritos, deliberate practice that, and taking sombrero selfies? This is from our local Mexican restaurant. Cool place. I think we're wired to react to change and even implied criticism. So it follows that to successfully introduce change, we need to understand its potential impact and the consequences, or the likely consequences. Do we really know better than our audience does? Think back to Visual Studio 2012. Did the UX team really know better than their users? Does it help or hinder them, or is it neutral? Well, it probably hindered because they had to invest time in relearning. How are they likely to react? Well, duh. Can we mitigate that? Yes, but you didn't. You just went ahead anyway because it's cool, right? We know what we're doing. A lot of the time we don't. We just convince ourselves we do. Again, this is the confirmation bias that we talked about yesterday. But what about the nastiness? I think all we can do is aim for the best behavior while planning for the worst. In other words, understanding how people react and why, which is what this talk is about. Deciding what is and is not appropriate, as well as what should happen when things go wrong. Being clear about it, talking about it, evolving it. And finally, recognizing potential harassment or abuse and supporting its victims. Because as a community, in general, the tech community does tend to fall down on that. The emotional response to harassment is to blame the person who is being harassed, because by reporting the harassment, they are representing a threat to order. Okay? And they're potentially endangering the tribe by subjecting it to outside scrutiny. So, codes of conduct. This has come up recently. This conference now has a code of conduct. Yay! I really welcome this. And I know that some people say, my tech space doesn't have a problem. And I'm not talking about here specifically, but it comes up everywhere, every time the subject is raised. But there's a quote here from Lauren Voswinkel on the Ruby bug list, which I think says it all. She said, a code of conduct fundamentally exists in the community in the same way that a disaster plan exists. It is there so that, should an incident occur, there is a clear indication of both the process through which that incident can be reported and the potential outcomes of resolution should remediation fail. To put it more succinctly, the involvement of the formalized process of a code of conduct is in itself a method of last resort. In other words, we don't want to use it, but we want to know it works. It's like a backup recovery plan. So test it, evolve it. It's a living thing. It's like, I don't know, it's like a code analysis warning policy. It's like a diversity plan in a company. It's like your backup plan. We work on these things. We evolve them. So, simple flowchart. Really simple. I like simple flowcharts. Okay. So, it also does something useful, something important. It sends a message. It says something to people who may not otherwise get involved. I know this is a safe conference. It's been great. You know, I've been here 10 years, and it's been wonderful, and you are all fabulous. But until I came here the first time, I couldn't know that. I didn't know whether I'd be welcomed and respected for what I had to offer. I didn't know whether, the flip side, I could be harassed by some and it be ignored, or belittled for who I am. So I think it's a good thing. There's an FAQ here on Ash Dryden's blog. I'd urge you to read it. It gives the whole background to this issue. All the questions have been asked pretty much, and she's answered most of them. This one at the bottom is the ACCU Code of Conduct from the event page. I've shortened the URL because it is this long at the moment. It's something that can be worked on, I'm sure. And this one's from Transcode last year, if you wanted to compare the two. A good diversity policy, code of conduct, also does something, in addition to a code of conduct, there are other things you can do. So, facilities. This is a digression, okay? Anybody see the flyer for XP Day that came in the conference bag? Did you look on the back? On the back, it basically said, in big red letters, we have childcare facilities. They are free. Well, duh. We all need different things. I don't need any of those things. I'm happy. I'm easy, you know? Just find me the bar. But not everybody is that fortunate. And if you don't think about what other people need, you're effectively excluding them before they get a chance to tell you. So you have to think outside your own box. All of our boxes are different shapes. So, what can we do to expand our tribe? This is what we've been talking about all week. So increasing diversity is a threat to the established order, is a change and therefore a threat to the established order. It redefines the tribe and represents a change in environment. And you see this, you only have to look in the wider social environment. Look at what parts of the media are like. If you want to see real nastiness, go and read Breitbart, the right-wing blog site. Awful. hateful stuff. It's what you could imagine Fox News could become if they ever got really nasty. But when we're all too alike, we tend to think the same way, which makes it harder for us to innovate, because we're all coming up with the same ideas, the same approaches to the problem. And we also, as I said the other day, we also have a skills shortage. So we need all the help we can get. We really do. So if your environment's predominantly cisgender, which just means not transgender, for those who've never heard the term, it's just gone in the dictionary, so change happens. Male and straight, you're missing out on talented people. I mean, loads of them. I had a talk. I had somebody write to me yesterday who was an unemployed C++ developer, struggling with depression, didn't know what to do. People are out there. We've just got to find them. We've just got to reach out. Other unnecessary barriers. Changing the composition of any community is really hard. Yeah, we know it's hard. But if we're creating more barriers, it's going to be even harder. So let's not do that if we can avoid it. It's unavoidable. You can't think of everything, and you shouldn't beat yourself up if you don't. But when somebody points something out, learn from it, accept it, try and do something about it. A lack of role models and mentors is a real problem, though. I can tell you that from personal experience. When I came out in 2001, I worked for a marine navigation company, and on the first floor of the building, there were only 2 of us who were female. 2. And then the other girl left. And I'm standing there in an environment where my co-workers were lovely. Their too much information threshold was about here. Okay? And like going in there, trying to get my head straight when I needed emotional support was a bit like I could imagine they would feel if they walked into a production of the Vagina Monologues. And then had to stay there for 8 hours, 5 days a week. You may have those people here already. They may be within your organizations. But unless they know it's safe to come forward, they will not stand up. They will hide. Because standing up is dangerous. So you have to make it really clear that the support is there for them and that they are respected for the contribution that they can give. But your code of conduct, your inclusive policies and all the rest of it, they help, because that's one of the signals. Has anybody read The Empathy Era, Belinda Parmar's book? Seriously, go read it. It's not that thick. One of the first things she does in that book is she describes how in the 20th century, most businesses were run on a systemizing basis, so top-down, hierarchical, structured, clear lines of communication. And that's where we got our cube farms from, our fixed hours and our presenteeism. It's where out-of-town industrial parks came from. But the world has changed. We're much more connected than ever. You know, since 2000, it's just been, the pace of change is accelerated massively, and it's not slowing down. People can see and hurt each other much more easily. The consequences of social violence are being magnified massively. You can kill somebody in another continent just by writing a message. Easy. Call a SWAT team in on their house and tell them there's a kidnapping there. And it has happened. But it's much, much harder to hurt people when you empathize with them. It's really hard. If you empathize with somebody, you feel what they are probably feeling. Or rather, you feel what you think they're feeling, which may not be the same thing, but it's a start. And it's much harder to ignore the hurt that others are feeling when you empathize them. I don't think we can hide in silos anymore. It's really easy to just sit at your desk and do your thing in your company culture while looking around you and saying, it's not my problem. It's really hard to do that. And it's a survival reflex. We've all done that at times. But if we are going to change things across the whole of our industry, and I'm not just talking about this, this is part of our ethics, this is part of our craftsmanship, it's part of the way the world is changing, the way we must evolve if we are going to keep up, if we are going to have the influence over the people who decide what, for example, our society is going to look like, what laws are going to govern our privacy. It's all connected. The tribalism that's built into our brains is the same tribalism that divides parties of governance into us and them. Okay? We can do better. I don't have all the answers, but I know that we are better than that. Belinda came up with 3 revelations, which I think say it all. She said, empathy is a commercial tool which can be deployed to drive profit. And here's the key, that's attractive. Okay? Empathic organizations can react faster. And that means they can exploit opportunities that non-empathic companies, pure systemizing companies, cannot. And you see it. You see it everywhere when you look. But here's the trick. Empathy is not an innate quality. It's a skill that can be taught, trained, and honed. It's like anything else. We can train ourselves. You can train yourself to think of others, just as you can train yourself to ride a bicycle. But you have to slow down. You have to stop. You have to take a deep breath. Think about what you're feeling when something around you changes and think, well, why am I feeling that? If you don't do that, you're just reacting. You're becoming a creature of instinct. Thirdly, the more empathy is embedded in a company's culture, the more it will attract female customers and employees. Not just female customers either, it's everybody else as well. Because you're changing the culture to be much more inclusive, much more open, much more able to adapt, much more able to challenge established wisdoms. If you're doing that to your culture, you're doing it to your business, you're doing it to your marketplace, and you're effectively doing it to your competition as well, because they have to evolve too, or they die. That's how business works. If you go back 20 years, you think of what your impressions of a company like IBM were then. Conventional, suited and booted, fixed hours, corporate line. Have you met anybody from IBM recently at a conference, on an exhibition stand? They look like us. They've changed. Their culture's evolved. It had to, because otherwise they get left behind. This is no different. So I'm hopeful. I'm also really impatient and often quite pissed off, but you know that already. But our industry now is very different from what it was even a decade ago. And young people joining our industry are bringing new ideas, expectations, and standards, and hopefully more diversity. Change never ceases. It's always changing. We just choose to ignore it until it's already happened. But we don't have to. We have the choice to get involved, to promote change. If you've read Fearless Change, More Fearless Change, Linda Rising's book, worth a read. But young people are also changing in ways that we can't predict. We tend to think of the generations as being just a little bit different from us, but every generation that comes through brings new approaches, new ideas, new expectations, new standards. If I go back to my parents' generation, They're baby boomers. My mum didn't work. She blamed herself for her whole life about that. My dad was an accountant, and he made me a promise not to do that. Their parents were miners. Both my grandfathers were miners. Both my grandmothers were housewives. Really, really, and they wore headscarves all the time, my grandparents. That norm changed in one generation. Now, if you go back to that generation, think ahead to the generation that will be in their 30s in, 2050, say. That's the generation that will be born in the next decade. Now, how much change is happening in that 100 years? Massive quantities of change. We can't predict what is coming from our kids, but our kids will change the world. They always do. We owe it to leave them a society and an industry which is ready for them, which is going to help them, not hinder them, which is not going to be, say, a company where you get asked to drive a car back for a senior manager from the pub because he's drunk, which is what I faced when I first started work. It's not going to be a company where we had a nervous breakdown and a suicide on the same team within 6 months because of stress. We leave those things behind and we make things better. We don't let them stay the same. I think that's really important, and it's really hopeful. We are in such a better place now, but it must continue to get better. We cannot afford for it not to get better. We've got a huge skills shortage, as we've been talking about this week. So let's all do what we can. And I think, if anything, that's my core message. Change comes, change happens. Embrace it, learn from it, promote it, make it a good change. Do your bit. Encourage others to do their bit. And smile. Because we live in an amazing time, in an amazing industry, and our kids are going to change the world. So, that's really all I've got to say. But change is definitely not in our comfort zone. So remember, we are always fighting against our innate nature. We have to work at this stuff. But I think sometimes we just need to take that deep breath and move the cheese anyway. Thank you. Any questions? I've got to find out which end has got the microphone in.
Oh yeah, sorry. At the start of your talk, you said that people respond irrationally to change, to the status quo. And more often than not, you can't change their opinion with reason and rationality.
Because they're reacting.
Yeah, because it's not based in reason. So sometimes you need to have change to move forward. Well, in fact, always you need change to move forward. So how do you persuade them that the change you're proposing is good?
I think it's not about persuasion. Before you can persuade people, they have to be close to agreeing with you anyway, or they have to be unusually rational and calm. If they're being emotional, the first thing you have to do is bring things down and find the common things that you agree upon. Here's an interesting thought experiment. Find two politicians who disagree violently about something. Put them in a room and ask them to identify what they do agree on. Get that conversation going first. There's actually a Radio 4 program at the moment where they're doing exactly that. Once you know what you agree on, you can then start to look at what you disagree on a little bit more dispassionately. And then you can start to pick apart why you disagree. Because once you understand why you disagree, you're more likely to find the common ground and be able to construct a consensus. So it's not about persuasion. It's about collaboration.
Well, okay. Yes, it's a very thought-provoking talk, Anna. I suppose I've just got two comments, really, in sort of terms of things I've sort of seen. As someone who's actually actively supported someone transgender at work coming out, I suppose I've got two observations. The feelings thing, it's very easy to get to a sense where it's a negative thing. And actually, there's a really, I think there's a really important aspect of our feelings. They tell us who we are. They give us a sense of, actually, this is really important to me, and I think we have to work with that. I think that's one thing. So, yes, in terms of trying to persuade someone, you've got to work that very fine line between giving them facts and not persuading them, but just letting them decide themselves. And the other thing that's tricky, I think, is being careful not to come from an aspect of fear.
Yeah, fear is the one thing that undermines everything, because
Exactly.
it sets off all of the strongest reactions in our mind.
Yes.
If you look at some of the nastiness that we see in parts of the media, a lot of it is motivated by fear of one kind or another.
Yes, and a lot of that is financially based in.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway.
If you tell people that that migrants are stealing their jobs, they'll react because it's a threat to their environment, a threat to their tribe.
So I think, and then my final observations are, I've always wondered, how do you tell, say, difference between something that's, if you like, good and bad in a sense? It's always a difficult question. And for me, the touchstone there has been, how much am I being pushed to do something, and how much am I being allowed to choose myself? And that's the whole thing about supporting this transgender person.
I think it's sometimes hard to do that, but if you come at it from a place of peace, a place of contemplation, then you're more likely to actually get there. I live in Bournemouth, and less than a mile from our house we have the beach, so we can walk literally just down the road, and we get to the overcliff, and whenever I'm stressed, I'll just go down there, stand on the railing, and just breathe. Suddenly, whatever is stressing me out seems less important. It becomes smaller, more manageable. I can look at it more clearly. So if you're in a position of stress, you are not going to be able to think clearly. So that's the first thing. So you need to find a way of getting away from that stress, putting it in a box to be dealt with later or whatever, and think this through. Think whatever through that you're trying to achieve. And again, if you can empathize with the person who's struggling, then you can also look much more dispassionately, much more empathically at what they're going through. Understand that. If you understand what somebody is dealing with, then you're more likely to be able to help them. But if you react to the things they tell you something and it's above your too much information threshold, and you get uncomfortable, you're going to react to that again. So it can be quite tricky, and you do sometimes have to redefine your own comfort zones in order to do it effectively.
Time for one more?
So I just have a few comments. Thank you for a really motivating talk. I think all I'd like to sort of say to folks as a take-home message as well is, do feel free to stand up, because often it's the person that's next to someone or closest to someone who's dealing with problems. They're the closest person that can actually deal with it and provide the support there and then. And I think a lot of us may wish that we shouldn't delve into what may be personal issues that someone's going through at work, but often you're in the best position to help, and you might make that big difference to whether somebody might be feeling really great at the end of the day or that they'll be just having a hard time. So do what you can do.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, I don't need that.
So, thank you very, very much for that, Anna. It was tremendous.
It's an honour. It's a pleasure.